this is on sustainability and your visions about it. There's a lot of talk about renewable energy. Your solar panels, your wind farms, your everything else, and energy efficient technology. So nowadays they make all your computers, all the different machinery, learning and everything into energy efficient. And in many of the new designs of the buildings, especially commercial buildings. So now you type in a few numbers, the lift door opens for you, the lift door closes for you. You don't even have to touch the whole system of getting in. So to come up with this sort of idea for that, I mean, who thought of it anyway? And how did they become all these renewable energy efficient technology? I mean, I think this is all really wonderful.
So maybe I can just share a bit from kind of a business perspective of how we view sustainability. I think obviously the market is very keen to implement sustainable measures, and I think what we have to be careful about is to make sure that we avoid doing a lot of greenwashing. That means sustainability efforts for the sake of marketing, right, versus actual real on the ground sustainability.
Right.
And Morrow, we're urban planners and architects, but so in urban planning, the scale is very different. We have projects that are thousands of square kilometers, and I think our job in terms of sustainability is to reduce the amount of carbon output there is during the reconstruction stage. But that means that we have to cooperate a lot with the engineers, that do a lot of the implementation downstream. But what we can do early on is to make sure that we destroy as little as possible of the existing infrastructure. Try to make sure that we don't tear down too many buildings, because the construction, especially the tearing down and the disposal of waste, that does make a lot of difference. The continuing technology, once a building is designed and developed, I think you could have a whole nother podcast about that. Specifically in Singapore, what we see in the market is that there is a significant difference between owned buildings versus those that are developed to be sold. So you will see that a lot of the office buildings in Singapore that are newer, they have LEED certification, or they have the BCA, Green Mark certifications, versus those that are developed and sold quickly, which you don't see that. I think it's quite obvious why, and it's really because the cost of applying for and meeting those standards is a lot higher. So if you're going to be building and then selling it off, what's the point? But we do see that the buildings in Singapore that are tenanted out and owned by the developer, they do have a lot of, using a lot more green materials. They're using a lot, maybe more efficient central cooling, better waste disposal, water recycling, and that's because in the long term, we're starting to see technologies that bring commercial value to sustainability in a longer period of time. But I think, it's still early days. We try to do what we can, but as architects and planners, I think our responsibility is, yes, make sure that the buildings that we do in Singapore hit BCA, Platinum, Green Mark, and so on. But from our responsibility, it's one that we have to be educated to see what's happening as well. So our staff do go for training. We're sending some of our research staff for training as well. And so we're still trying to develop and understand how do you do carbon accounting better for city planning, right, and things like that. So it's still kind of a long journey. Some firms are maybe a bit further down, but we want to make sure that we're not doing greenwashing.
As designer, we do try our best to reduce the amount of energy we consume. For example, when I was in HDB, I make sure that as much as possible, the buildings are oriented north-south rather than east-west. Because when you orient north-south, you minimize the use of exposure to the hot western sun. And also when you orient the building north-south, you catch a prevailing wind. So even long before we talk about global warming, we were already paying attention to minimizing the dependency on aircon. We just try to make the buildings as comfortable as possible. And also in the early days, as you probably know that in all HDB flats, on the rooftop, we have the secondary roof. Why? Because the secondary roof is to insulate the hot sun from going and hitting the top floor. So the top floor will not get too hot. And we don't, if it doesn't get too hot, they cannot even dispense with the use of aircon. So the planner, an architect will have a job to do as much as you can to minimize the need for energy. But sustainable energy is really supply of energy to the power station for them to distribute to the homes. But on top of that, I also care about minimizing the need of travel when I did the city plan. So we actually distribute the commercial centers from CBD. When you have CBD, then you have town centers, neighborhood centers, and so on. So you don't have to kind of buy a piece of soap or buy a cup of coffee all the way down to the CBD. You can walk to the neighborhood center to get your vegetable, get your daily supply. Just to walk, you don't even need to use a bicycle or motorcycle. Now that kind of saving of energy, even long before we talk about global warming, it was already incorporated in our plan. So there are two separate things. One is renewable energy to be supplied to a power station. One is when you do the design, try to do, or when you do the planning, try to create a city or create a building with a minimum need for energy. And on top of that, in Singapore, our building control authority actually has earned a reputation around the world, and that is they have this green mark system to try to insist that every building must use the right type of combination of design to reduce the dependency on energies. And this is also something as Singaporean we should be proud of.
Yep, very much so. Okay, so we talked about a lot about urban planning and all that. How about projects, whether it is residential or commercial? Is there any difference in thinking about sustainability?
Well, the residential buildings, the basic prototype of it, the dimension, the design requirements is different from commercial buildings. So we need to
residential is north-south facing to be sustainable about the hot air and how the wind flow and the sun directions. Then commercial, do you also would like to face it north-south as well, or is
it? Yes, we will do that. We will do that.
Every building facing north-south.
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
I see. So, but yeah, carry on, doctor.
Except that in the case of residential building, we can keep the building not so, the width of the building less, so you can enjoy the cross ventilation better. But in commercial building, the width has to be deeper so that the office layout can be more efficient. So then the dependency on natural ventilation will be harder. But these are some of the functional needs that we have to adjust. But despite all this adjustment, whatever opportunities offers, we will try to lay out the design in a way that is that consumes the least amount of energy. So and actually, it's not only residential building and commercial building are different. Even a hotel building also has its special requirements. A factory building has a special requirement.
Definitely.
Or school building has a different. So as an architect, you must know what are their functional requirements that cannot be compromised, because otherwise you compromise the functionality of the different types of building. But within that limit, we will still do our best to minimize the consumption dependency on energy.
Thank you for the great vision. So you also talked about design, urban design, design of buildings to make it, you know, more energy efficient and all that, and people can, you know, get to the necessities, you know, by walking instead of, you know, by cars. I think it's a really good idea to have everything in this, you know, within a walking distance. So then, okay, so now come to the adaptive design and the resilience of it. How does your consultancy address resilience and adaptability in architectural and urban planning projects, considering environmental, social, and economic factors? Daniel, you want to say something about this?
Look, I think the answer to your question definitely lies in the technical work that we do. So I'll just give a primer, and then my dad can continue on. Okay. I think when you talk about resilience, maybe I'll start with urban planning. Urban planning is a practice where you plan for very, very long-term vision. So for us at Morrow, we plan, you know, for 50 years, and sometimes even more. And the way we do that is using a very specific methodology, a very specific approach, where we try to understand the framing of the piece of land that we're doing urban planning for. So we need to understand what is the best and the worst case scenarios for the economic growth, for population growth, the relation of population in this, you know, in this new city versus, you know, the surrounding areas, or if it's a renewal of an existing city, how that renewal would impact the flow of migration from, you know, rural to urban, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of thinking behind how the best case and worst case of the future would look like. And so when we do our planning, we make sure that we build in the resilience so that the plan can you know, ensure that whatever is thrown the way of the city in terms of economic development, in terms of population, that the plan can withstand that changes. Of course, we go deeper and we do things like have variable sites. So some sites we save for future development. We don't do it right now. We don't, you know, develop everything right away. We allow planners to, in 15 or 20 years, to make a decision when they have more information down the road. So there's a lot of resilience built into our plans, even before we start to do any design work to begin with.
Yeah. Anything to add, Dr. Liu?
Well, I would say that when I was in HDB, one of the things that few people nowadays know is that I used to have a dozen sociologists with a PhD degree to advise me. So they advise me what people need, and because and I often tell people that in the case of a public housing development, we did not just build public housing, we built communities. That means you're not just doing housing, you also build shopping centers, factories, schools, sports complex, parks, and so on. In other words, everything that a human being needs. That means everything that a neighborhood can support, we put them in a neighborhood. That means everything population size of a neighborhood can support, we put in a neighborhood. Everything that the population size of a new town can support, we put as much as possible in a new town. And therefore, I often tell people that if a person in a new town is not too fussy, if he's quite happy to just study up to high school, he's quite happy just to work in any job in a new town, he can actually live his whole life in a new town without stepping out of a new town, because he got everything he needs there. He's got swimming pools, got sports, it's got cinemas, and so on. It's got shops, it's got eating house, restaurant, and so on. So this is to try to understand what human beings need, and then try to give them as much of what they need that can be sustainable by the population size. Because if you put something that's more than what the population size can sustain, that's not resilient. That kind of facility would just disappear in no time. So whatever we put in facilities, we put in a neighborhood, in a town center, in a central city, they are all related to population to make them sustainable. So this is also one aspect that people very rarely talked about that, but we actually not only did the study, worked out the specification, we actually built new towns, and also later I planned the city with this principle to make sure it's resilient.
Thank you. Very good. Every day in the newspaper or every other summer or winter, you hear, the world talk about climate change. You see the icebergs melting faster, you see the glaciers breaking off, and then you see the trees being chopped down or burnt away. So, in respect of incorporating principles relating to climate change and adaptation and mitigation in your design process, how do you incorporate some of the principles that
people in this day and age has a superstition? The superstition is that we only believe in technology and believe that technology can solve everything. And that I don't really buy that, because I spoke to you at great length just now that technology can solve the energy issue, but if you plan the city with resilience, you oriented the building at the right angles and so on, you actually avoid the unnecessary consumption of energy. And actually, I've been kind of talking to a lot of people about urban planning as a very important tool to reduce the consumption of energy. And so far, I have no luck to convince people that urban planning is that important. And they just believe that as long as you improve technology, you can solve the global warming. And that's why I'm taking the opportunity to say, please pay more attention to urban planning. I'm not saying that urban planning alone can solve the problem. It's a combination of good urban planning, good architectural design, and good technology, smart tech. A combination of this thing then will help to cut down the global warming issue in Singapore, in the world.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense now. There's again this commercial buildings and residential and hotels and all that, and in the region, the availability of materials, the building materials, the composition of, the certification of that tile is green and etc. Is for projects of a large scale. I mean, how important are all these relating to sourcing of all these materials that's in the market? How important is it? Because it will be cost effect. It will be relating to cost and everything else, how do you manage all that?
I would say that you see, when I was in HDB, our mission is to build affordable housing and keep the cost as low as possible. And therefore, whatever local materials that we could lay our hands on, we will use them. It's only when we cannot find the material that we need for our buildings, then we go for import. So actually, in the early days, Singapore, for example, concrete, we had our own quarry, granite quarries. We had our own sand quarry, and we even had our own brick factories. And we also did our own steel bars for the concrete. But of course, we need to import cement because we didn't have a space. So as much as possible, in the early days in Singapore, we use as much of our own materials as possible. And I certainly would encourage every city would do the same to minimize the import. But we cannot just blindly say everything must be import, because the building structure must be strong enough to last for centuries. So we must get the right materials. But I want to take opportunity to say that I also hope that despite the globalization of the world, we will hope that every city, if they can use as much of the local materials as possible to give its architecture as a special local look, indigenous look, different from other cities, that would also make the city look very distinctive, very unique, and then also makes the whole world a visually more rich world. That's something. So besides energy, besides environment, I think the uniqueness of each city by using local material is so important consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Daniel, anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe just to talk about what's happening now in the market. Definitely, sourcing is a very difficult problem, especially now after COVID. At the same time, the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot more new material types that are supposedly lower carbon to make, or low carbon to use to build. Plus, in Singapore, you see a lot of construction moving from, on-site construction to those PPVC, so the prefab and precast technology. So a lot of the new buildings in Singapore are using precast, where the development or the building of the building actually takes place basically in a factory, where it's a lot more controlled and you can reduce the amount of carbon output out there. But at the same time, all of these things, you need a bit of a balance, because relying solely on precast and prefab, actually, yes, maybe things built a bit faster, the carbon outlay initially is lower, but in the long term, you will see that there are a lot of design limitations as well. So that there is still this need to figure out a better balance. I think, there's a lot of innovative things that are happening where, people are treating timber in new ways to have timber buildings. So in Singapore, we just have our first fully 100% timber built building. I think that's a quite interesting thing. And there are new technologies around cement casting, but not so easily available to everyone yet. And I think, especially right now where we're still coming out of the pandemic, the bullwhip effect of the supply chain that occurred during the pandemic is still haunting a lot of, we're not contractors, but it's still haunting a lot of contractors. This balance is still kind of difficult to find at the moment.
Let's go on to the last section of our podcast. We're about future outlook and challenges.
Okay.
So for future outlook and challenges, what do you see as the future challenges and opportunities for sustainable design and urban planning, and how is your consultancy preparing for them? That's the first one. Second one is, how do you ensure the ongoing professional development and knowledge sharing of your team members to stay at the forefront of sustainable design practices? We mean outlook and challenges.
Maybe I start first. So
okay.
I think definitely we are sort of, our firm exists in two markets, the market for urban planning and the market for architecture. And the outlook for those two, it is different in different places. I think for urban planning, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, we traditionally have been in China, the Chinese market, because we're very familiar with how they do things there. And in fact, the profession of urban planning is very elevated in China, to the point that a lot of political leaders started out as urban planners. And that's one of the reasons probably why you can see that they develop quite quickly. I think in other parts of the world, the challenge to us is not business challenge, it's actually political challenges. I think there are a lot of great municipal and government leaders in ASEAN and in around the world who really feel for their city and want to do something. And when we talk to them, about what should be done, they ask us a lot of great questions. But there always comes, often there comes to a point where the political realities on the ground sort of put things on a pause, right? Because some places, they require so many sign-offs, there's a lot of bureaucracy. So what we're trying to do now is to develop develop ourselves to be more knowledgeable in these areas in new markets. So during COVID, we kind of, not say pivoted, but we looked more specifically at countries closer to home. So we've had some success, but the sales cycle, in urban planning is quite long. So it does take a while for us to develop these things. So that is a key challenge in urban planning. And it is and because of these political realities, it is hard to move forward in new markets so quickly. So we sort of, to kind of help us, we've started a side sort of entity that looks at maybe the first contact with governments. How can we approach them with much smaller engagements around livability, around urban issues, not urban planning per se, at a much lower cost. So it's something that's more feasible to clients. So that's a pet project that I've been working on. So a urban consultancy. So that's one way we've been doing it. And another way is we've been quite lucky in the sense that China has reopened up right when we needed it to the most. So we've gone back there in full force. And I think our team in the 3 years that have not been there, they've done a lot of studying, a lot of research onto how to approach it and reignite the connections that we had before. So we're quite lucky in the sense that we have very good directors in the firm who help us do that. In terms of keeping in touch with what's happening, we keep our ears on the ground to see what's happening. We send our staff for training quite often. So all our directors go for training in different areas every year. I mean, of course, part of it is mandatory in order to keep their license, but part of it is that we want them to know what is happening. So a lot of training now on retrofitting for retrofitting existing buildings to be a little bit more sustainable. There's we have a team who's looking at that as well. So this is some of the things we've been doing.
Okay. Yeah. Doctor?
Maybe I'll just add to say that the biggest challenge of securing jobs for urban planning is that not enough leaders, not even leaders, even professionals, while they are concerned about global warming, did not realize that the key to cutting down global warming is to prepare a good urban plan. Many of them just focus on technology, not realizing that a good plan actually contributes hugely to cutting down the global warming. And at the same time, every city wants a building to be unique, and they think that the uniqueness of a city comes from sexy architectural design. Not very few of them realize that a good urban plan actually makes a city very unique. I often tell people that my mission as a planner is not to just have a collection of unique buildings, because that would make the city look like the rubbish heap of unique buildings. I want to create a unique city, and Singapore is one example. So the positive side to our business is that a lot of people, when they come to Singapore, they like Singapore, not only because of its look, but also they realize it's a safe place. The people live in harmony with each other, very little social conflict. All these things were incorporated in my plan when I was in the government. And therefore, I still continue to get inquiries from people from different parts of the world, but a lot of them from China. And therefore, we're starting to actually receive many job inquiries now. And I'm happy about that because I want to do the jobs not because I need to work for my living. Instead, I want to share the good experience that I have accumulated over the years, and also proven by the fact that people like Singapore, which was largely planned by me and also built by me, so that I want to share this with as many people as possible around the world.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Liu. Thank you, Daniel.